Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Jason Freeman. I'm a producer and editor here in the Author Events office. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Emma Copley Eisenberg, for more than one reason. First, I really respect any writer who commits so thoroughly to a project as immersive as tonight's subject matter is and was. Second, I am a native West Virginian, and I grew up near the county where tonight's subject matter takes place, and as a kid, I think I saw the nice parts of that area. I went to Boy Scout camp there, went to school trips to Cass Scenic Railroad and the Green Bank National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and even briefly worked as an adult as a bartender on top of a mountain there. And while I think most people down there in that area know about these murders, we don't know anything about the deeper implications and effects of these crimes. So let's back up for a little bit of context so your author doesn't have to do it. In June 1980, two middle-class young women who had been hitchhiking to a nature festival called the Rainbow Gathering were found murdered in a remote clearing in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. Though no one was prosecuted for these crimes, suspicions turned on one local family, then on a convicted serial killer, and then seemed to melt away into time. Tonight's author moved to Pocahontas County for 2 years, combing through the hills and towns and memories for clues to the murders, discovering along the way how this violent act traumatized those affected and helped shape a complex narrative about the self-perceptions of Appalachians. And I'm here to tell you, the self-perceptions of Appalachians are extremely complicated. I respect any writer willing to delve into this subject and address a concept far more nuanced than typical media perceptions would have you believe. Eisenberg's other writing has appeared in such publications as Granta, McSweeney's, Tin House, Salon, and Slate. She is also co-director, I suppose, of Philly's own Blue Stoop, an organization whose ongoing author series puts nationally touring writers in conversation with local writers at bookstores and other venues throughout our fine city. Blue Stoop also hosts writing classes, workshops, and meetups for writers. Shout out to Blue Stoop. Tonight she will be in conversation with Sarah Marshall, a journalist, writer, and co-host of You're Wrong About, a popular podcast about misremembered history. Ladies and gentlemen, won't you join me in welcoming Emma Copley Eisenberg and Sarah Marshall to the Free Library?
Thank you to the Free Library for having me, and to Sarah Marshall, friend and great influencer of this book, for being in conversation with me. And I think many of you know like the basics of it because you've heard me talk, but perhaps for those who don't, this book has three sort of highways, if you will. A crime that happened in southern West Virginia in 1980, the story of the rich and interesting community in West Virginia where the crime happened and its relevance in like the broader history of West Virginia and Appalachia, and then the ways that my own story intersected with those two others and kind of rhyme and resonate with those other two threads. So I'm going to read you two small sections. One that is about the place a bit and also about the context in which this moment in 1980 into which these women and these events happened, and then the other a little bit more lighthearted. It's a personal bone I have to pick, which is the difference between Virginia and West Virginia, because many people seem to think Virginia is this like liberal Mecca and West Virginia is this like sad backwater, but like, oh no, we will disrupt that binary. Okay. So 1980, out with Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, all hail Iron Maiden and AC/DC. The first case of AIDS in the United States is reported to the CDC. 52 American hostages remain in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Gas is dear, and national unemployment barrels towards a rate unmatched since the Great Depression. Ku Klux Klan membership is the highest it's been in 15 years. In California, a Klan leader wins the Democratic nomination to Congress. 8 years after the Equal Rights Amendment passes both houses, the Republican Party withdraws its support, and the amendment will fail forever. The writer Alice Sebold is raped in a tunnel on the campus of Syracuse University and told by police that she is lucky. She lived. In a televised address the year before, President Jimmy Carter diagnoses the feeling in the air as a crisis of confidence. Confidence in the future has supported everything else: public institutions and private enterprise, our own families, and the very Constitution of the United States. He wears a blue velour suit and a diagonal striped tie. Quote, "We've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning." More than 30 years before Donald Trump will appropriate it for his own purpose, Ronald Reagan uses the slogan, "Let's make America great again," in his bid for the Republican presidential nomination. Not even that is original. It's truly shocking. I didn't know that. Quote, "I need your commitment, your hope, and your belief in this great nation's ability to begin again," he pronounces in a dark brown suit and a light brown tie. West Virginia will be one of the only 6 states in the nation to vote to re-elect Carter. When Reagan triumphs in November, everything will change. But not yet. In the spring and summer of 1980, there is still the possibility that the future might turn out differently, that the striped tie might yet prevail over the brown one, that a doomsday diagnosis might, in its honesty, be more uplifting than magical thinking. Many in West Virginia do not want to begin again or are not buying the kind of new beginning Reagan is selling. The paper in Pocahontas County is the Pocahontas Times, steered by the same family since 1892. Its main reporter and soon-to-be editor is grandson Bill McNeil, who went away to Ohio and Oregon for school and then came back. The paper is still printed letter by letter with handset type and a photo-setting machine, like a journalistic X-ray. Those days are gone, a citizen of Pocahontas County writes in a campaign letter from the time. Quote, "Technology has brought us out of the hollers and thrust us in the midst of a teeming, screaming society. Our people must be prepared to face the future." That's the first part. And then, hydration. Okay, so this part starts with a question that many people asked while I was living in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. Some of you in this room may have asked it, so you may be attacked, but it'll be okay. Was I in the South? Some people, both in Pocahontas County and not, seem to think I was. True, I could call up an image of a passing billboard for Mason-Dixon Auto Auction off of I-81 on the way there, memorable because above the billboard had twirled a real commercial 18-wheeler truck lifted on a metal pole. West Virginia is a southern state according to the US Census, but so are Maryland and Delaware. Some sources now say a better geographical border are rivers, the Potomac on the east and the Ohio to the west. If this is so, West Virginia is split vertically by the Potomac River watershed, with Pocahontas County almost exactly on the dividing line. In a piece The Atlantic published called "Where Does the South Begin?", the author suggests that religion is as good a way as any to draw the boundary. On these grounds, quote, "The divide roughly follows the Ohio River, but it cuts across West Virginia, where the southern tier is Baptist and speaks with a drawl, and the northern tier is ethnic and cheers for the Steelers." On this map, Pocahontas and its neighboring county to the north are colored a forest green for Methodist, but the counties to its south and west are red for Baptist. My friend from college felt sure that politics were at the heart of all things. In the American imagination of recent years, quote, "The South means Republican and conservative, the North, liberal or Democrat, but here's still a snafu. From 1932 to 1996, West Virginia voted Democratic in every presidential election except 3, 1956, 1972, and 1984. In 1988, when Michael Dukakis got slammed by Daddy Bush and Dan Quayle, West Virginia did not help in delivering that blow, while Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and even New Jersey and Connecticut jumped aboard and voted red. West Virginia joined New York, Massachusetts, and Oregon as one of 10 states nationwide to opt for the Greek Orthodox pro-choice candidate who used Neil Diamond's immigrant anthem, America, as his theme song. It wasn't until 2000 when George W. Bush narrowly pulled out the state's 5 electoral college votes and won the election by that exact number that West Virginia's red era began, a color that's been darkening ever since. Another possibility that people kept suggesting was that I was simply in Virginia. People could grasp Virginia, though she had driven there with her own hands and watched the state welcome signs appear with her own eyes. My mom could not grasp that West Virginia was a sovereign state, distinct from the western portion of Virginia. I once lived in Richmond, a woman told me at a conference. I hear it's lovely over there, especially in Roanoke, a man said to me later on a plane. I took a drive to Harrisonburg, Virginia one day, where there was an Indonesian restaurant I liked. This necessitated crossing the West Virginia-Virginia border on a 2-lane back road so I could see if there was a discernible difference. There was. The surface of the road changed on the Virginia side. It was smoother there, fewer cracks, more shoulder. There were more brick, less clapboard, more sky, fewer trees. The houses were set farther back from the road. There were swaths of lawn and horses and other cars with foreign plates, North Carolina, Texas, and flags, all kinds of flags. To look into what distinguishes West Virginia from its neighbor and parent, Virginia, is to see a state that prefers fewer laws circumscribing the behavior of its citizens, regardless of the content of those behaviors. In contrast, Virginia's history is one of being highly involved in governing the intimate lives of its citizens and legislating the protection of the social status quo. No law is the best law seems to be the unspoken slogan of West Virginia, in my opinion. It has been legal to have gay sex in West Virginia since 1976. The comparable figure for Virginia is 2003. In 2006, the state of Virginia ratified a constitutional amendment defining marriage as between a man and a woman and prohibiting the Commonwealth from creating or recognizing any legal status for relationships between people who weren't married. A similar amendment was proposed in West Virginia in 2009, but it was overwhelmingly voted down by the House of Delegates. In 2018, a nonprofit called the Population Institute released a nationwide report card that evaluated each American state on its reproductive health services. West Virginia's grade was C, Virginia's an F-. For years, Virginia law has required women to have a vaginal ultrasound before an abortion, in which the provider must, quote, offer the woman the opportunity to view the image. Though 90% of women in West Virginia live in a county without an abortion provider, the state never passed any such law. West Virginia's state motto is Montani Semper Liberi, or Mountaineers are always free, which I had now seen tattooed in classic black ink on no less than 8 hot young West Virginians, comes with a simple image. 2 men in rounded brown cowboy hats carry an axe and a pickaxe and chill against a large boulder, inscribed with 1863, the date of the state's founding. There is also some corn and a swath of green lawn, upon which sit 2 crossed rifles and a red cap that seems plucked from the head of a Smurf. Contrast this, it's very nice, you should look at it. Contrast this with Virginia's Sic Semper Tyrannis, or thus always to tyrants, which makes Virginia fundamentally a place of opposition to the supposedly sinister force of tyranny. Mountaineers are always free takes another tack. This is who we are. This is the state we're in. Free. Thank you.
I am going to ask you a first question, which is pretty short, but which I think is going to have a long answer potentially. Is this true crime?
Ah, yes, Sarah. I know that we both have a lot of thoughts about this.
Thoughts and feelings.
Yes, thoughts and feelings. I feel like I have 2 parts to this answer. Yes, both and. The first part is no, in the sense that I think traditionally true crime has been not even just a genre, but a way of telling a story about violence that has to do with what happened and who did it as like the central element, the central driving force, and also a very can be like a very lurid or sensationalistic attention to like the details of the violence that happened and like where they were done to like the bodies and all of that sort of who committed the act of violence and what does that look like feels like the sort of central question of traditional true crime. So I don't feel like I'm doing that, or at least I was really trying not to, because as you can see, like if you open the book, the first 10 pages lay out the entire case for you. Like if you're someone who cares about spoilers, like so sorry. Like that's not what this book is. It's not a book about who did it. So I think I try to make that very clear on like page 1.
And if you want to proceed where you can stand and read the first few pages and be like, okay.
Right, like it just doesn't do that. Like I'm sorry, it's so disappointing. But I think.
But what does it do?
Right,
Let's
exactly.
talk about that.
Right, I feel like the way in which I want to say yes, it is true crime, is that I feel like true crime has. People are like, the true crime boom, and like, isn't that great, or isn't that sad, or like whatever, but I feel like it mostly just means that there's more stories that are telling more complicated truths about stories that have to do with violence in the world. So I think that we're getting a really like expanded and exciting way of looking at criminal justice and violence more and more. Like even just like the When They See Us series that's based on the Central Park 5 case, like is a way of using a violent act to look at bigger questions. There's lots of books that have been doing that for a long time. I'm certainly not the first, but I'm in some ways like gratified to see those stories getting diversified, being told by women and queer people and people of color about those questions rather than like using those acts of violence as the beginning and end. So both and, I think.
Right, both and. And it's interesting too to draw the distinction between crime and violence because it's definitely, I would say it's both, but the idea of crime as the fuel for a narrative suggests that it's, well, it's really about finding out what happened and finding the perpetrator and bringing them to justice, whatever that means. Whereas a story about violence and the violence that befalls certain bodies in our society seems like potentially a completely different kind of story.
Yeah, it was really interesting. My publisher felt very strongly that the word murder and double murder had to be on the cover of the book, and I'm ambivalent about that because the fact is they were killed. These two people were murdered, if that's the word, and also I think there's something about putting a murder in the title that
by the way, there's a murder in here, don't worry.
It just kind of like creates a black hole of meaning, I think, which can overshadow a lot of other things. So I was trying to resist that that sort of trope by, again, originally I wanted to put the two women who were killed like alive, like have the first chapter be them alive and traveling, because they did have this like amazing trio road trip across America in 1980, which is like super fun and beautiful, and I got to learn about who they were and how they traveled and which like weird buses picked them up, and like that information exists because one of them survived. But I eventually thought that it would make more sense to start with the place, which is Pocahontas County, because if all these three threads like do intersect somewhere, it's this physical place, like the physical land. So I wanted to start in Pocahontas County, showing that like the allegiance of the book was there, but there's a lot about the women being alive, and I try to make them complicated throughout the book, so it's not just like a dead woman on page 1, as in like Law and Order or whatever.
And I'm also curious about, because your writing involves so many interesting subjects, and often, when you're doing a piece about a certain question or subject matter, you often, it seems, will bring it to focus on, well, let's look at this example person and talk about their life through this lens, which I think is what makes your work so powerful so much of the time. So what was it about, really there are so many people in this book, but what was it about, the three women in this book that you're writing about that kept you with them and kept you in, that is the reason we have this book today? Like, why this book? Why these women?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because my mind changed a lot during the writing of the book of like who I cared about and who I found the most fascinating and what was propelling me to keep writing on this project. And I think it's true that originally I began with, actually to be most honest, I probably began with this woman, Liz Jondro, who's sort of the original or titular like third Rainbow Girl, in the sense that she did travel with these two women, but sort of at the last minute, out of this kind of like mystical or like sort of, she said she kind of just had a feeling that she shouldn't continue to complete this journey to this sort of utopia gathering that was happening in the woods, and she just decided to go elsewhere, to take her own, there's this moment where she gets in an 18-wheeler truck headed north, and her friends get an 18-wheeler truck headed west, and they're parting. And I was very interested in that moment. I think that sort of like image of what does it mean to be like, she carries a lot of like trauma and survivor's guilt. That's what she like immediately told me. And so I think that idea of like people who are traumatized but not harmed, like not physically harmed, is something that I'm very interested in. And so I did definitely start with her, and talking to her made this book feel real and feel like something that I wanted to do for real, as opposed to just like cheat on my fiction writing this. And but I think that eventually, as I researched more in the book and I learned more about Vicki and Nancy, who are the women who were killed, I did empathize with them and care about them, and in some ways identify with them as like being a sort of middle-class like lady from elsewhere who was just trying to like go on an adventure and like find your life and like be the kind of lost that many of us are at 22 to 26 or whatever. But I think as I wrote the book, it was in many ways the men who were from Pocahontas County who started to like obsess and draw me forward. So there was a series of like local dudes who were accused of this crime, and many of them were incarcerated for periods of time ranging between like a month and 2 years, which functions in a similar way as like the struggles against cash bail function today in Philadelphia. Like basically they are poor, they don't have a lot of money, they're locked up on a single statement, and they can't make bail. So they stay there for between a month and like 2.5 years. There was like about 9 guys to whom this happened. And so I started feeling a lot of like riled up feelings and empathy for them as well. And in many ways, like my empathy shifted and then shifted back. So there was this constant feeling of like, I kind of am, I think I came in being like, I'm a like feminist lady and like violence against women and like all the things which are real, but then also feeling like actually there's all this like shame and violence that's perpetrated on poor dudes, like working class dudes in this area that felt equally really wrong and felt like those two things were always in tension. And in some ways it became that tension that propelled me to keep writing of like, but there are these two things that are happening that are both huge problems and really distressing, and that kind of two forces also like started to echo and rhyme with some of the ways that I saw both young women in this area like trying to figure out how to be more empowered in their lives, and also a lot of my friends when I lived there were guys in their 20s and early 30s working with their bodies on the land in a really dangerous environment in a lot of ways, and not having a lot of access to like think about their own masculinity and the ways that those things always live alongside each other. That tension became like what kept me going for a long time. Too long, like 7 years.
Well, it also feels like you're writing about the trauma that a region has experienced, and I mean,
Yeah.
that's also, I feel I have the same question about that is, when did West Virginia enter your writing as opposed to when did it enter your life?
That's a good question. I think I was always interested in the ways that, whatever we're going to call it, social justice, questions of equality, questions of representation, like intersect with art and aesthetics and all of the things. So I was always reading work at Haverford College, and having to do with these questions, and certainly was given like amazing Appalachian Southern American writers in college, and I started reading people like Bell Hooks, who's from Kentucky, Nikki Giovanni, Nikki Finney, Denise Stardina, Irene McKinney, people that are rooted in the region who are making amazing work and don't get read enough. And I think it's really interesting. We were talking in the ride over too about what's the difference between like speaking for versus speaking alongside. And I recently read this amazing book called Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong. She's going to be in our Blue Stoop series, so come in February. But she essentially says that there's this idea in like scholarship around the subaltern, or people who don't get always to speak in their own stories, that there's a difference between speaking for and speaking alongside. And what her work does a lot of times is try to speak alongside, like parallel, and speak in a different experience. And so I think I always was trying to make very clear that I was like speaking alongside these other people and in conversation with them, because there are plenty of amazing Appalachian and Southern American writers working today. There's amazing people that are coming through Philly and coming through New York in the next couple of years who are putting out amazing work. So I was always trying to be like, what is this experience that I'm now occupying, which is sort of in the middle. Like, I spent this time in the region, I'm not from there, and like, but it feels like it sort of rewired my brain, the experiences that I had in this area. And if I can sort of function as someone there's lots of people who share that experience of not quite from, not quite there, there's like the Appalachian diaspora in many ways, people who have moved away, people who want to return, people who move away and return, go to work, leave, all of the things. So I think I'm really interested in, and have always been interested in, like knowing that I'm not occupying that position, but wanting to always like be in that conversation to some degree. So probably a long time ago, 10 plus years.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, it seems like also that your first time in West Virginia was during this crucial moment a really long moment, but a
Yes.
crucial period in your life, and when, and the way that you've been describing it is, going, like, looking for your life, basically. And I think there's something that is so resonant to me, and that I imagine will be to a lot of other readers, about this feeling of growing up with true crime stories. Is like, once there was a girl who went out to seek her fortune, but they killed her, so you can't do it, and
Don't even try.
Don't even try, because
Yeah,
you'll get murdered. So just stay home. It's fine.
Exactly.
And so I feel like there's something to me that's so resonant about, the story in this book that takes place in 1980 is interwoven with you kind of at roughly the same age as your initial subjects, trying to figure out some of those questions and figure out, like, how do I exist?
Yeah.
And I'm just curious about, was there a time when you were not bringing memoir into this? Was there a time when this was only memoir? How did we get to this beautiful, this layer cake that we have?
Strange 3-layer cake. Yeah. They're the Reading Women podcast, which does the sort of Reading Women Challenge 2020 is cool. They recently they were like, this book has a little bit of everything. We're confused. And I was like, I also am. But I think that it had many different iterations. I think originally I was writing fiction. I was living in Charlottesville getting my MFA in creative writing and fiction. And I thought, like, maybe I'm going to, like, dip a, like, baby toe into nonfiction. And then, it was a very, like, difficult and intense time in Charlottesville, Virginia at that time. I was teaching writing. I was teaching writing at the time when the UVA Rolling Stone article was published about rape on campus in Charlottesville, and then
that was so many scandals ago.
Right, but I feel like the thing is, like, that horrible time, and then there was, like, a young black dude who was beaten on campus who was a student leader. Like, that time was the precursor to, like, what would become 2 years later the Charlottesville white supremacist rally, and the ways that proto-Trumpy people were starting to assemble online even then in, like, 2013. And I just felt like the world was kind of like in Buffy when, like, the Hellmouth opens, It was kind of like that, I just felt like all of a sudden the Hellmouth had opened, and I was like, I cannot just, like, write fiction anymore. Like, that's just not going to work. And
I can't write stories about people who see a bird and then they're like, my marriage.
Right, no, exactly. And that was the epiphany. Or, like, there were so many, like, guys in my MFA program writing about, like, train hopping in 1910, and I was just like, I cannot. I just can't. So I started thinking, like, I'm just going to dip a toe into these questions. I'm just going to do some small reporting, like, no big deal. And, like, maybe it'll be a magazine piece, like, I don't know. And I think that though I always kind of knew, like, nagging at me, there was, like, this feeling of, like, I existed as a young person in Pocahontas County, and supposedly I was there to, like, serve, like, because I was part of this AmeriCorps Vista program, which has, like, a long and storied history in Appalachia as a program that's specifically about fighting poverty. So I was supposed to be there to fight poverty. I was supposed to be there to serve, and I felt, like, all of this tension and, like, doubt about whether that was even possible. So I always had my own experiences and my own experiences with young people, women, and then guys as well who are older, like, in my mind. And so I felt like there was just, like, ways that the historical material started to, like, rhyme and mirror the experiences I had had when I lived there, and I just felt like those rhymes start getting louder and louder, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And I think, there was a time when I thought I was writing 2 separate projects. I was like, I'm gonna write a memoir, and then I'm gonna write a reported thing, but I actually feel like the ways that, when it's done well, resonance between 2 completely different stories can create, like, that third voice. Like, isn't that a thing? Joshua told me about this. There's, like, in, like, trios, like the trio album with Linda Ronstadt and Dolly Parton and Emmylou Harris, it's like there's, like, another voice that's produced, right? Katie knows. In when, like, people are doing something magical in conversation, there's, like, another presence that happens. So I think there was something, like, sort of ineffable or something that I was trying to get at that I couldn't get at in either of these stories. And so when they came together, I felt like I was starting to get at it more. So that's why I eventually merged them. But I was very nervous about that. And originally I wanted to put all of the stuff about me at the end of the book. Like, you would read everything that was reported, everything about the area, everything about the crime, and then I would be like, hello, at the end, like, feelings and stuff. And my editor was like, absolutely not. So I felt like it made sense to, I didn't ever want my experiences to feel like that was what the book was, like, about, but I did think that I wanted to also, I didn't want to write a book either that was, like, Appalachia was once a place long ago and now it's gone. Like, I wanted to be like, no, like this, there's all these like people in contemporary Appalachia living doing amazing work, all the things, and figuring things out just as I was. And so felt like the contemporary was important to include. So we came to the compromise of, there's like 7 parts in the book, and 2 of them are about like me and contemporary, and 5 of them, plus the prologue, are historical / about, are reported. Yeah.
And I'm curious about what you think it does for the book as a whole to have you as the person who we know that we're seeing all this through. Because I think something that you and I have talked about a lot over the years is how unorthodox and how productively unorthodox it can feel and be to attempt journalism or to attempt to write nonfiction with this approach of like, hello, I'm a person. And like everything I see is like from this very narrow pinhole that my perspective allows me, and I'm admitting that. So we can all know that like, yes, I do have limitations, and I can also see things that the omniscient voice can't necessarily see. I mean, what do you feel like the book is that it wouldn't be if your initial plan had, you know, if we had like Emma comes in at the end and says hi?
Yeah, I think that was my other concern, was like if it was like only in third person and only reported, it would feel like the truth with a capital T, or that I thought that I knew the truth with a capital T and I was gonna like tell you that. And I feel like there are books that can do that and can succeed in that way, like maybe like Behind the Beautiful Forevers, the Catherine Boo book, or like sometimes the best sort of very thin New Yorker pieces that have like, you can tell some flavor of the person's words or mind, but it is really super, probably like Jennifer Gonnerman, who wrote the piece about Khalif Browder, the young man who like stole a backpack and then was incarcerated at Rikers for 9 years. Like that kind of journalism that's like, the story is itself strong enough and true enough that there is really like one way to tell it. But I just felt like this story was not that, and I felt like just uncomfortable from the beginning about occupying that position of like omniscient third person narrator at all. So yeah, I think the kinds of like nonfiction that I most enjoy reading are when people can exactly acknowledge that they're a person, that they're seeing, that the video camera is like, or like I guess like the window is not clear, like the window is like cloudy and you're like trying to make little like holes through it to like see what's behind. But I think that's most exciting to me, because I'm actually interested in the process of like, what is that window of glass? Like, what is the thing through which we see other things? That's like very fascinating to me as well, rather than thinking that we can ever just know what's behind the window, like what's out there, or like we can never know. So I tried to make it very upfront, like clear on the first couple pages of just being like, these are my positionalities. I'm not from this place. I occupied this like weird middle space of feeling very connected, very like having some insights, feeling very rewired as a human by this space. But like, this is what I have to offer. This is what I've learned, and like the jig is up. Like I'm not like God, you know. And I think that's really important, because otherwise, that's like when stories start to be violent, when they start to do work that's I'm not comfortable with. And I'm sure that I don't totally succeed in like abdicating that role, because parts of it are still written in the third person, like what I read about the period of 1980. And anytime you take facts and turn them into a narrative like that, that's written in third person, like you have immense power. And so I think I was scared of that power to some degree. And that was a thing that my editor always kept trying to do. Like I kept wanting to put in all these quotes and transcripts and things from people's perspectives to use their exact words verbatim, because I'm very interested in like what people say verbatim, again, as a way of looking at how they interpret facts. And then there were some compromises I made for narrative clarity and for the reader's experience to include more of that like third person tone. But there's huge swaths of transcript and a lot of primary documents in here as well, which made it very hard to read for the audiobook. Apologies. But, and I didn't do any voices, so apologies. But I think that it's important. I think it's important to hear people's own words verbatim as a way of thinking about like what, how they think about events is more important than how I'm gonna turn those events into like a smooth narrative, I think.
We have to turn towards the Q&A in a moment,
yes.
But yeah, I guess I would love to know what you feel, you know, because here we are, this book came out 48 hours ago, right?
Something like that.
Like 60, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, this amazing week. What do you feel you've learned from this? Like, are you feeling exhausted yet triumphant? I hope.
I'm feeling exhausted yet triumphant in like 30% of my soul. I think in the, I think in the other 70%, it's like you just always feel like it could be better. You know, like if I could have more time. I think this was something that I was talking about with my friend who's like a real sociologist. Like she says that you've reached like saturation point on a project when you keep hearing the same thing over and over again told to you. Like when you're looking into a question or really trying to learn the answer to something, you hear different things, and then eventually you'll start to hear the same thing, and you realize that that's when you can stop the project. And I feel like I did get to that point, but only in the last like month of writing the book. So like I just feel like there could be so many ways of learning more and going deeper, and I think the questions of like representation and who am I and how I've written this like still keep me up at night, and those things are really I don't know that there's like ever an answer to that. So yeah, there's always ways in which I want to like take the book back and keep working on it and keep asking people questions. There's a lot of people who are dead who participated in these events. There's one guy, Pee Wee Walton, who turns out to be like this sort of central witness, central person who supposedly saw these events, who is sort of dragged into court. He's had a lot of like violence perpetrated on him as well, like police abuse, but he eventually did agree to testify, but at times he believes that he dreamed that he was there and these things happened, and at other times he believes that he really was there, and like that is fascinating to me, and he wouldn't participate in the book. He was like the only person who said no. So I'm like, if I could only just like get to speak with him, and he works at the hardware store with like the ex-boyfriend of mine who's in the book, and like I just feel like there's so much interesting stuff and so many things that I don't know still. So I would love to like take the book back and make it better with the other 70% of my soul, I think.
So when you get yours signed, just like say thank you and go, or else she's going to start editing it.
My question is, this is maybe closer to a hard question than a softball question.
That's okay.
But just out of my own interest, are you interested in how the town is going to respond, or the responses that will come out of that, not in like a reading the comments on an article kind of way, but just in
like a real way.
Yeah.
I am interested. I have access to the people that I know and still have relationships with, and the response has been extremely mixed in the truest sense of that word, in the sense that some people have been like, this is really like interesting, and I have questions about this, and I want to participate in like reading this and talking about it, and like people that participated in like the program for young women that I worked in are like, this is so cool, and like I have thoughts about this. And then there are also people who are like, I don't want this book to exist, and it doesn't feel necessary. These events have been rehashed like several times by, in my opinion, like shittier journalism, but like also valid. And there's like a very valid like feeling of like, again, still like West Virginia in particular, but maybe also broader Appalachia, like being written about in ways that have a long history of being super messed up, and I acknowledge that. And I also think that a lot of the people that I worked with in West Virginia are really great writers and have access to amazing like media and platforms of their own, and I have no doubt that like they'll write their own authentic responses, and I will retweet them, and I'm happy to be in conversation with like whatever people want to say about it. And yeah, I think those responses will come, and I'm gonna be doing a couple events in West Virginia, and I think I'm gonna speak with West Virginia Public Radio, so I'm interested to see what people have to say. Yeah.
Knowing that fiction writing is perhaps your first love, and that this is obviously a different kind of project for you, I wondered how you're feeling about taking on maybe more nonfiction projects or other sorts of things in perhaps a similar vein, or if there are other projects that you're thinking about right now in that way.
Yeah, thanks. I feel very like no more nonfiction right now. But like,
You're not one of those marathoners who wants to walk home?
No, right. I'm just like, pick me up in a cab, I'm done. Yeah, but I don't know. Ask me in like 2 years when like some other story is like knock, 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 and I'm like, no. But then I'm like, okay. But no, I think I have plans to keep working on fiction right now. I have a novel that I'm working on. I just want to write like the weird, queer, like fat, sexy fiction stuff too that like I love and feels really fun. I think that for a while I felt kind of bad about like writing fiction and nonfiction, like just pick a side, won't you, you know, kind of vibes. And I was like, but I think that my fiction got a lot freer and like more fun when I started writing nonfiction, and I think that my nonfiction got more precise and more sort of morally serious when I wasn't trying to like shoehorn it into fiction as well. So yeah, maybe fiction first, and I'm hopeful not another book like this. But you never know. Never say never. Yeah.
So, you know, whatever you write next, obviously, because now you're fabulous and it'll be a super big deal and everyone will read it. I was wondering what it felt like for you as someone who's putting out a big piece of work for the first time to have that be a real story and someone else's real story, as opposed to fiction, which is more of your own private island, and what other responsibilities you felt or fears or anything like that.
For sure. Yes, I've seen like many folks with their first novel coming out with like the weird palm tree on it, or like the weird like cat on the cover, and I'm like, oh, to have a cat on the cover, you know? Like it just seems really nice. But maybe later. But I think that no, it feels enormously. I think that's the 70% that feels like, yes, I'm glad it's in the world, and like, oh god, it feels stressful still. Yeah, because like even a very like small example is the didn't know what would happen with the New York Times book review, if they were going to review the book or whatever, and then they reached out to my publicist and asked for 4 photos, 3 of which were they asked for one of Liz, which is in the book, and 2 photos of one of the women who had died and 1 photo of the other woman. And I was like, because like they gave me permission to use the photos in the book, not to be put online in a media publication. And so that meant, like, it was a joyful moment for me, because I was like, holy shit, the New York Times book review. And I was like, yes, do whatever you need, take everything. But then I had to be like, actually, no, like, you can't do that. So I had to ask the families, and they did eventually say yes, but it was tough, and it wasn't a decision that I could make just for me, because I was like, that's a different thing to have your family member online and in a publication that you didn't agree to. So it feels loaded, tough.
I know that you are a fan of bringing both and into the world, which I appreciate.
Yes.
What is your biggest both and takeaway after this whole project that you would like to tell us, that you would like the world to know?
Ooh. I do feel like the biggest both and of the book is like violence against women exists all the time, and it's happening all the time, and it's not an accident that I don't think the takeaway of this book is like, don't go out the door because you're gonna get murdered. The takeaway is like, go live your life, but like women do get murdered, right? Like that's true. And also I feel like the other current of just like, masculinity is like a poison that flows in all directions, right? And that affects all people of all genders. And so feeling like the ways that like gender and sexism and misogyny kept everyone sort of locked in this deadlock, which is true everywhere, but I think I spent years that made that particularly true in Pocahontas County, like seeing the ways that everyone's suffering all the time. Like that's kind of my takeaway. It's like trauma is everywhere and everyone's experiencing it, and no category makes you queen of that trauma, I think. And like there were so many tentacles that trauma like started to manifest. Like is a thread in the book about this fellow, Joseph Paul Franklin, who is a very ill, he's dead. He was put to death by the state of Missouri. He was, I think, potentially involved in this case, but has a whole other life in many other forms of media. But I started to like have empathy, like even for him, and like he was motivated by like hate and white supremacy and committed a lot of murders in the 80s and 90s, and is like abject, horrible, like human. And also I spoke to like his daughter, and I spoke to like people that had survived killings that he had done, and like there's just trauma flowing in all ways and like splattering everywhere. And so to say like you have more or you have less or yours cancels out yours or this is true but like your suffering doesn't matter. Like it just that became almost impossible to keep track of. I was just like everyone is proximate to this crime in a lot of ways and everyone's like suffering. So sad but true, I think. Yeah.
When you are in the act of writing, would you generalize and say, oh, I'm in heaven, I love doing this? Is it a struggle that you love, or is it, I mean, how would you characterize it? Because I'm not familiar with your work, but just hearing you talk, it sounds to me like it would be a glorious engagement, that it's like an accomplished figure skater getting on a good sheet of ice, that you can do what what you feel like you'd like to do. And I'm just curious about how it is for you.
Oh, wow. That's such a beautiful question. On good days, yeah, there's a good hour maybe between like 9 and 10 a.m. before the anxiety kicks in, you know, and you have that nice cup of coffee and you're like, no one has sent me any emails, and I feel really like free and excited to be in that space. And probably like some of my best work has been done at residencies, or I've had gifts of time where I don't have to live in my regular life, and that figure skater feeling is totally available. And that's kind of like, isn't that the thing where it's like, that's why people keep pulling slot machines, right? Where it's like you pull the lever and it nothing happens, and then you pull it eventually, and like something amazing happens. Or like the mouse with the cheese. Like I think it's kind of like that, where like 9 out of 10 times it's like I'm bored, or I'm hungry, or I don't know what I'm doing, or nothing's happening, and then that one like beautiful time happens. And I think you can like increase your odds over time by being there for it, like just being open to that feeling. And I'm sure like there's so many writers in the room, like other people would have different answers, but that's like mine, I guess. Like on good days, that feeling is available, and it's fun.
Obviously, you were writing through some incredibly difficult, complex trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so what were the best, most joyful things you did for yourself during the process of writing to keep your feet on the ground and keep your head clear?
Yeah, I think that anyone who does like work perhaps definitely in the criminal justice space, and I think a lot of journalists like journalists have like some of the highest rates of alcoholism and suicide like of any profession. It's like really scary in a lot of ways, and I don't know that like people who deal with trauma, certainly like social workers and all those folks like should get better support than they do. I definitely dreamed about murder for like every night for like 3 years probably, like either murdering someone or being murdered, and so that wasn't ideal, I would say. And I think I should have taken better care of myself. I have a really good therapist, which I highly recommend to everybody. I think that I'm not really someone that likes to exercise, but I definitely find community and being in community with people like Sarah and people like other people in the room who have been in community with me during some of these moments of just being like, we don't need to talk about it, but like, isn't the world like so full of stuff that's like really hard? And just people being like, yup, like me too. Like I'm also doing this work has like been really amazing, and also ice cream. It's important to get in there, yeah.
It's kind of a weird question. Where in your body you feel the book?
Ooh, wow. Where in my body do I feel the book? I don't know. It's like with a question like that, you just gotta go with your gut, and I feel like it's like my lungs, probably. Like just a lot of breathing in and out, and I like wasn't sure how to end the book really, and it's not a spoiler because I don't know that I discover anything like that isn't known. Like the book is more about why and what it means again than what happened, but I do get to meet with Liz Jandra, this woman who again was implicated in this crime. Definitely traumatized, but not harmed. And she sort of says like, she like still lives out of her van. She's like in her 50s. She's like living a very open sort of with the wind's life. And I was kind of like, that sounds terrifying. Like, how do you do that? And she was like, I just breathe in and out. in and out. And I was like, ah! But yeah, I try to sort of do that sometimes.